Welcome to another episode of Breaking the Lens of Bias. I'm Kat Killian, and I'm glad to be here with you today to talk about our topic, which is why are people banning books? Or why do we think we should ban books, perhaps, is a better way of phrasing it. Last week, for those of you who don't know, was Ban Books Week, and looking back, I wish I would have switched it, but I'm glad that that was on my radar and I could talk a little bit about it this week. Just so you know, Banned Books Week was started by the American Library Association in 1982 in response to the continuing bans of books in libraries and schools around the country. And the idea was to focus on those books and to start dialogues as to why people are banning books. Um, and here we are 40 years later, and it's still an issue and it's still coming up. I'm saying that I'm going to start by saying I admit my own bias in here. For those of you who know me, I've worked in the library field for almost 35 years, and um, so it's a topic that I know well, and it's a topic that's near and dear to my heart. Um, because of my own bias about it, because I do believe that people should have free access to information. However, I want to look at the biases and I want to look at where they came from, and I want to acknowledge those biases that others may have or opinions that others may have in terms of my own bias. So, by and large, the groups that are banning books, um, and this has always been around, but it largely came out of COVID and some of the perceived failures of the educational system uh, for our children during that time. That was part of it. Part of it was also the civil unrest that we have seen recently in response to that, and just other kinds of societal things. So what I wanted to say is I'm not going to give out the names of the groups, for the sole purpose is that if this is something that you're really interested in, I would like to suggest that you do the research for yourself. Honestly, it only took me uh, 15 minutes to bring up a number of articles on both sides to do. So it's very easy to just do a Google search and these things will come up. Um, but the groups, by and large, are banning books. They're largely parental advocacy groups. So their belief is that parents should have more say in their children's education. Sounds very good to me. Um, I think parents should be involved in children's education. That's my opinion. So far it sounds good. They're saying it's for liberty. Um, and so that right away makes me question. So what is liberty? So I want to kind of put that out there. Is what does liberty mean to you? Another buzzword that they use is they have freedom of choice. So what does freedom of choice mean to you? Um, and on the other side of it, they're claiming that there is indoctrination going on, usually by someone of the opposite political view. And I would like to say that this is on both sides of the political spectrum, although one is advocated a little bit more strongly and is much more in the news that we see today. Um, so saying all that is, what are the purpose of libraries? Um, and so here's where the bias comes in. So when we're saying it's for liberty, but liberty for whom? Liberty to say, you should not read this book, or my children should not read this book, and therefore that book should not be available. Okay? So keep that in mind. That book should not be available. Does that mean just for their child, or does that mean for all children? The freedom of choice. I would like my children to read certain materials. And now that's something is how do you get that about? And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit later of how libraries select books. And then the whole idea of indoctrination. Well, certain kinds of books are being allowed in libraries because my people are trying to indoctrinate my children to believe in a certain thing. And really, this is a prime example of what we call the framing effect. And I'm going to read to this from the schoolofthought.org, who I get many of my resources from, but not exclusively. So people get on this bandwagon that, yes, I should have liberty, I should have freedom of choice. I don't want my children to be indoctrinated to think these horrible kinds of things about people. And so a lot of that has to do with context and delivery. So the framing effect is that you allow yourself to be unduly influenced by context and delivery. And this is what's really important about this is we don't like to think of ourselves as being easily manipulated, because I'm all for safety for children and children having access to age appropriate resources, and I think parents should be involved in that decision making to an extent, and how we can go about doing that is book banning the way to go, is something to think about. But when we have that humility to agree that we can be influenced by thoughts, many times these things are very emotionally fraught, like the safety of our children, the safety of our children, the safety of our children. And we need to be involved and have that liberty. And what does that mean? So if we're influenced by those kinds of things, we have to really say, how is this question being framed? And also, what is being left out? So here's what I would like to say. That's the bias that I'm working with here. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the selection process in libraries. Now, I happen to work in a university library, so it's a little bit different than public or school libraries in K through 12. But I think the process works basically the same. Is there are people who are in charge of purchasing materials, and they go by what is being read, what is being checked out, and what is the interest of the community. And when I say the interest of the community, I mean the entire community. It's not just one or two people. So when working at the university, when I saw a book that I came across that I saw we didn't have in our collection, I would request that it be collected. Then the people in charge of that would look at that request and would say either, yes, this is a fit for the collection that we want to have, and it will be used and read, or they could say, no, we're not collecting in that area. So for example, in a university library, if I requested a cookbook, that's not really a topic for a university library. We didn't have any culinary school attached to us, so they would say no to that. But if I requested the latest book from a certain history professor, or sociology or scientific kinds of work that even may have been more mainstream, but it allowed for the expression of ideas that fit in with the university's mission. So in a public library or in a school library, those are the same kinds of considerations that are done. Is it appropriate for this audience? So if you are working for example, an elementary school, the librarian probably would not select books that are more appropriate for high school kids. Just because A, the reading level isn't there, B, the subject matter may be age inappropriate. And again, why waste resources on materials that are not going to be used by the student population, instead concentrating on materials that will be used and that should be used by those grade levels. The public libraries are a different story. There are different, what do I want to say? Different areas of the public library. So there's the adult section, which usually is fiction and nonfiction, and then you have children's section. Some larger libraries may also have sections for teenagers. I recall growing up that when I was a small child, grammar school, first, second grade, and I wanted to read, I was directed towards the age appropriate section for me. As I grew older, I moved into the teens books, and as I grew even older, into the adult section. And those materials were age appropriate for me in terms of my reading level, in terms of what I was able to comprehend, in terms of subject matter. There are some subjects, I think most people can agree, not are off limits for children, but may not be appropriate for them in that kind of context. So saying that is that, all right, this is the job of the librarian. Now, you as a citizen have a right to challenge a book. Is this appropriate kind of material? I often go back to the definition of pornography by, I forget the Supreme Court justice's name who said it. I can't define it, but I know what it is when I see it. And that's the same kind of thing of trash material. Is it worth it for it to be collected? By and large, there's a lot out there, and more is being published. And so books tend to go through a review process, through publishers, and through various book reviews. There are tons and tons of book reviews out there based on subject matter, and librarians use these tools to decide what books will be purchased, in addition to community requests, because it's not only community requests. So in the university library, we would take things like, we knew we had strong subject areas being taught, so we wanted to bolster those collections so that we had a variety of material to support those educational needs. In a public library, what is the interest? So for example, I live in a community that's very diverse. So a diverse variety of materials are good, including, we have a large Spanish-speaking population in the community. It's about 30%. So that we have those resources for those people, Spanish-speaking. Now, we don't have a huge Chinese population in my area. So it wouldn't make sense to collect Chinese language materials. And so, all right, so those are language materials, but then there's also materials of interest. So for example, by and large, bestsellers are coming out. So if there's a book that, here's a great example, a book that comes out and then somebody decides to make a movie on it. And so people see the movie and they're like, oh, I'd like to go back and read the book. So libraries may have not collected that initially, but they might go back because of that popularity of the movie, decide to get the book. And then there's kinds of general things. So it's a very nuanced and very well thought out process that have a number of tools available for why books are done. Now, if you have a problem with a book and you are a parent, okay, and they're saying that these books are teaching these things, okay, I would first of all ask you, have you read the book? Have you actually sat down and read the book that is being questioned? Is it one offending phrase, which has been, in the case of a lot of books, especially going back 40 years, it has been that. an offending phrase or offending passage. People think that sexuality is a big thing. So, we can't talk about sex with our children. And again, does a book need to be banned from the library? Does all access need to be revoked? And I would say there are other ways to go about that, especially if you're worried about your child, than banning the book for all populations. So another kind of aspect again is what is being taught in the school. So there's the availability of material, what is being taught in the school. I would parse that out and say that is kind of a separate issue. If you are interested in what your children are being taught, that's when you become active in the school board and ask to speak of curriculum, but be open to what is being said. Don't go in there with your, I'm framing it this way, my children are being indoctrinated, I have no liberty in my child's education, and ask yourself, is that really true? What is being left out of those arguments? What are you leaving out of those arguments? And how is it being framed? So, I think I've given a good idea, a good framing of how selection is done in libraries and why certain titles are done. But I'd like to talk a little bit about how the books that are being banned. In the past year, there have been 1,600 books banned from schools, some more than others. The majority of the books happen to be on sexuality issues, primarily LGBTQ issues, and race issues, looking at race in a different way. And again, I would ask, have you read the books? What is really going on here? Are the books the kind of books that you think should be in there? Are they available? As a counter opinion to the opinions expressed in those books or the points of view expressed in those books. And so I'm putting that out there. Are you going through the process and requesting the kind of books that you would like to see in your community and in your schools? Are you asking that those books be made available? Or are you just asking for certain books to be banned? And again, banned for everyone. So I'm not saying that anybody's opinion is wrong. I'm asking you to look at your biases. And I'm asking you, is it proper? Is it right? Is it promoting liberty? Is it promoting freedom of choice for you to saying certain materials should be banned? And I'm going to leave it to you to answer that question. I know my answer for me. So 1,600 books banned just in the last school year. And we just started the school year. It's been maybe a little over a month and a half into the school year, depending on the district that you're in. Florida happens to be one of the hotbeds of where these bans have taken place and the kinds of books that can be read. And I'm going to give you some information from an article, so excuse me as I bring this up. Basically, there are very few parents who are opting out of allowing their children to have access to the libraries. So Florida has been a little bit different. There has been some specific bans on books in certain school districts, and books have been challenged and are being reviewed. But there is a whole thing is that parents do have a say in these things. And in theory, I think that's great, but let's really look at some of the numbers. So in the Flagler County schools, they have about 13,000 students. There have been 19 children who have been restricted from library materials. 5 at what they call level 2, the parent can select up to 5 books to restrict, and 14 at level 3, which is no library access. That comes to less 0.15% of the student body without full access to the library. So again, that's where the choice comes in. So is it that, what are you really trying to accomplish if you think books should be banned? Where are you coming from? How are you framing that? And the question is there a better way that you can ban books? And there are more uh, statistics, and basically it's in line with that. There's another one where the school district said parents need to opt in for that, but it wasn't made widely known. So only 23% of the children have access to the library and can check out materials from the library because their parents opted in. The other 77%, by and large, have not been aware that, oh, I need to opt in on that. And so our children being, what do I want to say? Are they being censored from being able to use the library? And how is that affecting their education in terms of materials that you feel they probably should have access to? So if you believe in book banning, and you believe in safety for your children, and I think that's very important, I urge you to do the research yourself, to look at what people are saying and saying, is this biased? Let me look at myself. Let me take a look at some of these books that people are saying are inappropriate and why they might be inappropriate. And they might be inappropriate for someone who is 8, but they may be appropriate for somebody who's 16. And so I'm going to urge you to look at your bias in this matter, whether you think materials based on sexuality and race relations should be addressed, or whether you think materials that have been around for a long time but may have biases in favor of glorifying the South and the Civil War era and those kinds of things. And when I say glorifying, I mean making it sound like it was a noble cause instead of being the truth. And my whole point here is to try and get you to look at your own biases and look at where you may need to reflect on the different points of view. I know doing this work to present this show helps me to look at my own biases and look at that and try to think of different ways that allows freedom for everyone, but at the same time allows us to make the right decisions for ourselves without hindering those choices from other people. So thank you for tuning in today. I hope to see you next week on Breaking the Lens of Bias. And next week, I've already got my topic. I will be discussing a political commercial that's currently running in Illinois, and how I think there's a certain level of bias in that commercial, and what is that arousing? Because I've done a lot of research into it, and it's a very, very interesting commercial. So I hope to see you then. Thanks for tuning in. See you next week. Bye.